If you've ever checked on your garden and found this on your tomatoes, don't panic. It's actually a nutrient deficiency called blossom end rot, and yes, you actually can prevent it. Blossom end rot is something that causes a dark, sunken, leathery black spot to appear at the bottom of your fruit, aka the blossom end. It's not a fungus, it's not a bacteria, it's not any type of pathogen at all. It's really just a source of calcium deficiency in your plant. This condition can appear at any stage of fruit development, but it's really at the very beginning when you're just starting to get fruit. It's not just tomatoes. This can show up on peppers, squash, eggplant. So if you're growing a variety of crops, this is something that you want to just look out for in general. Scientifically, how does blossom end rot even develop? So the way this works is that, of course, you have calcium in the soil that's taken up through the roots, and then the calcium moves through water transport throughout the plant. The issue is that once the calcium is in the plant, it's not mobile, right? So say, for example, this tomato plant here, it takes up calcium and the calcium goes here to the leaves. Well, the calcium just can't say, I want to be transported to the fruit because that's where I actually need to go. Once it's there, it's locked in. So blossom end rot actually happens when the calcium is not getting to your fruit. That calcium needs to be there in order for the cell walls to build up. So when you see that black, leathery, sunken area of your fruit, that just means that calcium was not able to make it to that area and it started rotting off. It's more like a cosmetic defect, but it's just unsightly and it looks bad. And so a lot of people don't want to see this on their crops, me included. So there are actually a few things that you can do to prevent this throughout the growing season, and I'm going to talk about those right now. You got to make sure that 4 things are happening if you want to prevent blossom end rot. Making sure that you're watering consistently, that you're not over-fertilizing your plants, that your soil has adequate calcium in the first place, and lastly, that the pH of your soil is within optimal range. Inconsistent watering is the #1 cause of blossom end rot. So calcium is actually transported through water. So when your soil is dry and not moist, calcium can't even move through it to be taken up by the roots of your plant. So any fluctuations in your soil's moisture will affect calcium delivery. You can look at this from the perspective of underwatering, and you can look at this from the perspective of overwatering. If you've underwatered, then calcium delivery can't happen at all. It pretty much stops immediately because there's no water in the soil for the calcium to actually move and get transported through the roots. But if you overwater, you'll actually damage your root system because tomatoes do not like soggy soil. So you need to make sure that the soil is moist, but not like muddy. If you're growing your tomatoes in a container, this is going to be tricky because containers tend to dry out faster. So you might have to actually adjust by watering more. But if you're using a raised bed like me, you can definitely water infrequently but deeply using a drip irrigation system, or you can use soaker hoses like the ones that I have installed right now. They've even got now some drip irrigation systems that work through solar panels, so that's also something you can check out. Most plants, y'all, they only need like 1 to 1.5 inches of rain per week, and that's not even really that much. Before you apply any type of water to your plant, you want to take your index finger and just dig down into the soil about 2 inches and just see, is it wet around your finger? Is it moist? And if it feels like there's enough moisture, you can go ahead and hold off on watering. You don't really need to apply any more moisture to your plant. So the best advice I can give here is not to follow a rigid watering system. Just kind of observe for yourself if your soil is actually dry. And if it's dry, go ahead and give it some water. The second thing to be aware of when it comes to blossom end rot is to not over fertilize. So what actually happens is when you over fertilize, especially with a nitrogen heavy fertilizer, the plant is going to prioritize sending all of its nutrients to the leaves and not really the fruit. The reason this happens is because nitrogen is pretty much what is going to create this really green, leafy, verdant look in the plant. When we want to produce tomatoes, we want to prioritize fruit development. So we don't want to use nitrogen throughout the whole process heavily. You know, we might want to start with a little bit of nitrogen if it looks like our leaves are pale or dying off. But then as you take care of a problem like that, you want to make sure you're using a more balanced fertilizer, one that definitely has some calcium in it so that the plant, you know, once again can uptake that and send it to the fruit where you actually need it. I actually have a video on this that I just posted about the secret to growing big brandywine tomatoes, but you can definitely apply this to any type of tomato that you're growing as well. In that video, I actually explain how to fertilize, which fertilizer to use. So go check that out if you have a chance. The next thing you want to focus on when making sure that you prevent blossom end rot is that your soil actually has enough calcium in it in the first place. One thing that I wish I had done this season, and I'm still kicking myself for not doing it, is getting a soil test done to see what nutritional deficiencies I actually have. I feel like, hands down, that's the best way to know if your soil has enough calcium, and that way you're not doing a bunch of guesswork. And if you need to add amendments to your soil, then you can actually do that. There are a lot of home remedies, a lot of DIY tips and advice online about how to raise calcium in your soil. And truthfully, whether you want to go the DIY route, if you want to add the crushed eggshells, or you want to add bone meal, or even if you want to add the garden lime, which most people do to raise their soil's calcium content, all of these options are actually slow release. So that's why I feel like it's so important when it comes to gardening to plan and think ahead, because all of these options are going to slowly raise the calcium content of your soil over various weeks, various months. The best thing that you can do is before the season starts, before you even plant anything, if you can, start preparing your soil at least 2 months ahead of time by adding some garden lime and making sure that it actually has the opportunity to slowly raise the calcium content of your soil. And that brings me to my last piece of advice, which is to make sure that your soil is the right pH. Now, for tomatoes to grow optimally, you want to make sure that your soil's pH is between 6.2 to 6.8. I'd say maybe 6.5 is the sweet spot. But the truth is that your soil's pH is actually going to affect how well this plant can actually take up the calcium from it. And this is another good reason to do a soil test, because you're not doing any guesswork. Whether it's trying to figure out how much calcium your soil has, like we talked about in the previous tip, or trying to figure out if your soil is the right pH, a soil test will eliminate all of this for you and tell you exactly what you need to know. Let's say, for example, you do a soil test and you find out that the pH of your soil is below 6.0. That means you actually have acidic soil, and when your soil is a bit more acidic than it is basic, the calcium actually binds to other minerals in the soil, which makes it unavailable for uptake by your root system. And if your soil's pH is too low, of course you want to add garden lime so that can be raised over the next few weeks, the next few months. And if your soil's pH is too high, like let's say 7.0 and above, you can definitely mitigate that by adding sulfur. You can also use organic matter to bring your soil's pH back down. You can use compost. So you definitely have a variety of solutions at your disposal. But once again, you know, like we mentioned before, it's much better to just at the beginning of your season, test your soil, see what it needs, and then if it needs any amendments, you have weeks and months to mitigate this before you even need to plant. Okay, so now it's time to answer what's probably the biggest question anybody has once they see blossom end rot on one of their tomatoes. Is this safe to eat? Well, it looks bad. It seems really disgusting, but what does the research say? To my surprise, it is completely safe to eat. All you have to do is cut off the damaged end, that end that looks black, leathery, and moldy. Just put it in the trash and you can go ahead and eat the tomato. If the rest of it looks fine, meaning it doesn't smell bad, then you can eat it. That's what the research says. I can't believe it, but it's true. The one thing that I did find out though is that you shouldn't use the damaged ends for canning. It seems that the damaged flesh can actually compromise the acidity and the texture of the tomato, leading to an increased risk of spoilage. So you definitely don't want to can the damaged blossom end. But if you don't want to throw it away, you can also just put it in the compost bin, especially since we learned in this video that blossom end rot isn't caused by any diseases, fungi, or pathogens. You can definitely put that in the compost pile. So just remember, if you see blossom end rot on your tomatoes, your whole harvest isn't ruined. It's typically just the first fruit of the season. The plant normally can stabilize and come back from this, and you get fruit that's normal again. But if you want to prevent this altogether, just make sure that you're following the tips in this video. I wish you a wonderful harvest, and until next time.